Brandon Willey, founder and CEO of Hownd. How are you today?
Doing great. Good to be with you guys.
Yeah, great to have you here. Really excited for our conversation. We're going to talk about 5 keys to successful impulse marketing. And that is something that I feel like you are an expert at, something that Hownd is phenomenal at doing. First, before we even get into it, though, can you give us just kind of an overarching maybe understanding of why impulse marketing is so important?
Consumers are busy. We've put on the consumer hat. We're consumers as well as doing everything else that we do, and we're busy. And so, what's important is capturing, taking advantage of a little bit of attention that you've been able to capture from that consumer when you get something in front of them. So, it doesn't matter what type of marketing it is, but you want to give them some sort of decision that they can then take right away and then do something with later. So, you just want to. And the whole goal is to, again, just take advantage of the limited attention span that a consumer has as they're moving from one thing to the next. And that's typically where you try to grab them, is in that transition point.
So Brandon, one of the things that you talk about in your article is reach. So can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, it doesn't really matter how good your messaging is or how good your call to action, which is another one of the key points, is if you're not getting it out in front of the consumer. And so your goal is to get your messaging, and specifically whatever it is, that particular call to action, out in front of that consumer in as many different places as possible. So that might be, leveraging an email list that you've built up and sending out an email. It's going to show up in their inbox, but it's also going to be in getting in front of them on social media in their feed, or going and maybe they've landed at a vacation rental and they're staying in an area that's either a staycation or somewhere else. And when they log on to the Wi-Fi at the vacation rental, or they're scanning the little QR code there to get to the guidebook, having your promotion sitting right there. And so forming partnerships as well with neighboring businesses. And there's a lot of different pathways there. But the goal is, again, reaching out into as many different crazy random places that you might be able to capture just a little bit of that consumer's attention to get them to take some sort of impulse action.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's kind of finding a lot of those creative opportunities to be able to get in front of them and be able to capture their attention, as well as ideally capture their data as well. One of the things that you also talk about is adding value in every marketing communication. How does that work? What are some of the ways that operators are able to really be able to do that?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with saying the thing that's the worst you could possibly do is to send a newsletter to your consumers. I'm talking about consumer marketing. In B2B marketing, it's totally different, right? Newsletters provide value because another business is wanting to learn about your business. So there's a different use case for newsletters in B2B marketing. When you're talking about B2C, you want to make sure that, one, again, it's something they're going to be able to consume quickly. And they don't really care or want to read, unless they're really invested in you as a business. They don't want to read about all the great things happening at your location. They want to see exactly what you're able to give them right at that time. And so typically adding value might be, it can be a discount or some sort of promotion, but it also could just be something bundled together, or an opportunity to come try out a new attraction or new addition to your facility. But again, at some sort of where it's going to provide them value in their life at that moment. And that's really what we're talking about. A newsletter, or just sending out informational updates about new hours, those kind of things. Those are great to push out onto Google Maps and Google My Business, but they're not great to push out over email. You're going to burn your consumers' attention. And the last thing you want to do is drive an unsubscribe because they're not getting something of value from your communication stream.
Right. And if they're not getting something of value, they're not going to answer your call to action. Right. So that's you just mentioned the call to action and how important that is. And, I think just looking back on my experience, that's something that I'm still getting better, trying to get better at, is including something that you want something to do, some impulse that you want them to take. So how do you craft a good call to action that actually creates the desire to do something?
Yeah. So one of the like easiest things to do, easiest mistakes to make, I guess we'll say, is to get excited and carried away with the communications that you're putting out there and having multiple calls to action. So the first thing you should do is just try to narrow it down to one. Give the consumer one option to take. And if you have to send out multiple different types of communication, whether it's different social media posts to get all the different calls to action out there, maybe that you want, and different information, that's fine. But in each post, make sure you're only giving them one action to take. And that action should be something related to getting them to come in the door or come through your gates, and not just something to, again, like you want to make sure whether they're claiming something that's going to be a ticket to come in, or whether they're buying something in advance or a gift card that they're giving to somebody, but something that you're going to actually ultimately, that's going to lead that person through the door down the line.
So in terms of the different types of calls to action that you could put out there, ideally wanting to focus on one, would book now be one of the best types of calls to action you could do? Or is that actually, maybe that's a little bit of a pitfall that that operators might fall into?
Yeah, it's it's very good segue there, Josh. No, actually, what you want to give them the ability to do is buy now and book later. So again, it's all about that impulse. When one of the, again, easy mistake is you want to drive them. Let's say you've set up a really good online booking system, and you want people to leverage that. Maybe you're queue based or you're capacity limited, and so you really do ultimately need to get them to book. That's totally fine. That can be an end result of that early call to action. But if you're trying to capture somebody on impulse, and if that consumer has a very limited time window in which they're interacting with your promotions or your marketing, you got to give them something that they can take action on right away. And if they're planning to take their kid, and maybe their kid wants to go with a friend, or even, you just don't even know, you just want to take your kid later that day or later that week, but you got to double check the calendar, got to arrange schedules, make sure pickup from school or whatever is structured in the right way. Like there's a lot of different reasons why I may not be able to book right away when I see your marketing. And so what happens is if your one call to action is book, I'm going to see that call to action as book, and I'm going to be like, shoot, I don't know when this is, so I'll do this later. I'll just save it, or I'll come back to it. It doesn't happen. Again, put the consumer hat on. You don't come back to that unless it's something that you really, your kid is asking you to do over and over and over again. You're not going to likely come back to that until the next time you see something from that particular business. So you want to give them the ability to buy, and that may be pre-buy or pre-sell a package, or maybe a gift card that's some dollar amount that's maybe just below your overall ticketed price. So it's something that they can just take an impulse action on, make that purchase, and then send them follow-up email to actually book that time later. So we like to call that buy now, book later. And it's it works for birthday parties. It works for just average, everyday events as well. Give them something really easy to buy now. And then when they have time to sit down and look at their calendar that night or later that week, then they can find the time to actually book with you.
What I think is really interesting about so many of the things you've talked about so far is that there's an intersection, right? Where there's the peak of the interest and the ability to actually do something with that call to action. And you talk about the life cycle of the journey, and really understanding the data points along that life cycle, and maybe where that intersection is. So can you talk a little bit more about understanding those data points and how that helps drive where you put your action for the impulse?
Yeah. Well, the real important thing along, like you said, along this whole journey and customer life cycle is collecting as much data as you can about the consumer. And you can get really fancy and really evolved. These enterprise companies are doing this all day long, and they're optimizing. They're using AI and machine learning to better understand their customers, ingesting tons of different data, and like you can get really fancy with that. The first steps you just need to do, like the first steps to take, are just to collect your basic information about your customer. And that starts with their email address, it starts with their birth dates, cell phone numbers, ways to actually get in front of them, and then key trigger times. So again, birth dates, last time they visited, and then you start to get into a little more specifics. One, if you can start building a database around what types of attractions they've maybe interacted with, what are their favorite rides, or what are their favorite types of things to do, what purchases do they make while they were there, how much have they spent. There's lots of additional data you can get. And as you learn more about that customer, or even have that customer tell you more about them, maybe give them the opportunity to give you their preferences as well. Both from a communication channel standpoint and also from an interest standpoint. The more that you learn about them, the more that you can better optimize when you're actually distributing that marketing material to that consumer, and what you're actually offering in that marketing, and then where you're actually distributing that as well matters. If this particular in your region, if your consumers are not interacting with one channel, then you shouldn't be spending your time and effort and money in that channel. Shift it to a channel that obviously drives a higher ROI or more awareness or action. But you're not going to be able to know that unless you're collecting data in general about the whole life cycle, but also about that particular customer. The other thing I think that we put off, new customers are really like, they're really sexy, right? Like you want to always get new customers. But I think we don't think about bringing our existing customers back in the door as often. And a new customer is 5 times more expensive to go bring in the door than an existing customer. And that existing customer, if you've done your job as an attraction really well, should be somebody who has the opportunity to become more loyal the more frequently they come back in the door as well. And so the more times you can get that person to come in, the less effort it takes to actually market to them and bring them back in as well. But also, the more you get to learn about that customer, to deliver a better guest experience and better customer experience and better marketing and targeting down the line as well.
Awesome. This is fantastic. So 5 keys to successful impulse marketing. To do a quick review, number 1, reach. Number 2, add value in every marketing communication. Number 3, always have a single call to action. Number 4, buy now, book later. And number 5, collect data throughout your entire customer lifecycle. Brandon, if people want to learn more about how Hownd can help them with that, or if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
You can go to hownd.com/attractionpros.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for chatting with us today. We really appreciate it. And for everyone out there watching, just remember, we are all attraction pros.